Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is it's been recently suggested to me because it has literally recently been solved, I guess. Well, yeah. It is a Jane Doe case, but not a usual Jane Doe case, in the form of she was a young woman who was actually given the name Princess Doe by the investigators in her case because he didn't want her to be, or they didn't want her to be, just sort of rung in with all of the other John and Jane Does. Not that they are not important, I'm not saying that, but he just wanted to give her a different name, and you know, when he came up with Princess Doe. So that is how she has been known for the past 40 years until literally the other day. Well, 2 days ago I think it was, and I say that you have no idea by the time I'm posting this. I believe it was the 15th of July 2022, they finally announced that they had found her identity. And Princess Doe is no longer a Princess Doe. We now know who she is. So, I haven't actually done this case before. Let me get into the background and everything, obviously, that happened in her case before we get down to the details of who she actually turned out to be. So, on the 15th of July in 1982, a cemetery worker called George Keyes was just going about his daily duties, just, you know, doing his job. He works at Cedar Ridge Cemetery, and that's in Warren County in New Jersey. And like I said, he's just doing his thing, just doing what he's there to do. And then he comes across this horrific discovery. So there was like this ravine towards like the back of the cemetery. I'll put pictures up of exactly where her body was found. But he was sort of down there near this shallow ravine, and he actually came across Princess Doe's body. She was laid on her back and she was deceased, and decomposition had already set in as well. She had her skirt draped over her legs, no underwear was found on the scene, and sadly her face was literally unrecognizable, which has made this case all the more difficult. Like I said, it's taken 40 years to finally find her identity because they had no idea what she actually looked like properly. There's been so many facial reconstructions done over the years, but they just didn't know for sure. I mean, not that you ever do, but you can get a rough idea, more of a rough idea than if your face has been absolutely battered in. And it was that bad that they literally couldn't even tell her eye colour, so that just goes to show how badly she was beaten. So obviously he called the police and the investigators came straight away. It was led by a man called Eric Kranz. And they got to work. They estimated that she'd been there between 2 days and 2 weeks, because the problem that they had was that it was a hot day. Well, not just a hot day, it was hot, and humid. So obviously that speeds up decomposition. So they wasn't sure on the exact time frame as of yet, because she was quite decomposed. But, you know, that could have been sort of expedited by the hot weather. And as it turns out, it actually was, but we'll get more into that in a little bit. So, basically, they estimated, which is obviously all you can do in these sorts of cases. She had no identity on her. They had no idea who she was. Like I said, she had no face. Well, she did have a face, but you couldn't tell what she looked like. And so they got to work. They believed she was between 14 and 18 years old. She was white, had medium length brown hair, and they estimated that she was about 110 pounds. She also had defensive wounds all down her arms, like she fought very hard. The thing in this case was, because they had nothing to go off, and you know, they didn't even have her face, they really thought that sort of the devil's in the details. She had one hand with red nail polish on, the other hand had none. Obviously, we have no idea the reasoning behind that. Maybe that's just how she wanted it to be. Maybe she'd picked off the other side and had a habit of doing that. Who actually knows? We'll never know. But if it was something that she did, then it might be something that people recognise, you know. She has red nail varnish on her right hand or on her left hand, you know. That might be a distinguishing factor for her family or friends to know that it is her. So, like I said, all these little details, they try and get out there to the public to try and find out who she was, who she is. They saw that she had 2 piercings in her left ear. I mean, they could assume that she had some in her right, but her right ear was very badly decomposed, so they couldn't actually tell. They also couldn't tell whether she had been sexually assaulted, but it was kind of assumed that she possibly had just because she, you know, there was no underwear found and her skirt was on top of her body. It's a bit of a strange thing to do if you haven't sexually assaulted someone. That I can't confirm or deny that though, because like I said, she was too badly decomposed at that point to know that. So we don't know. She may have been or she may not have been. They also found that she in general had good dental hygiene. Like, she had 4 fillings in the back of her teeth, which, you know, showed that she had been in contact with a dentist at some point in her life. She took care of them, so you're thinking that she must be, she's not homeless or anything like that, in the sense where she can't even afford to look after her teeth. Do you know what I mean? So they were looking into that. She also had some 2 front teeth had grey discoloration, and there are numerous reasons as to the, you know, as to why that was the case. And just her teeth were generally really healthy, quite healthy. When they tried to find out anything else, like, did she have any tattoos? No. Does she have any scars? Like, she could have had some surgery that they could have traced back to her, possibly. She didn't have anything like that. She had never given birth and wasn't pregnant, so they couldn't trace her through any of that. And despite all of the information that they did get, it didn't lead them anywhere, because they still had no idea who she was. Like I said, they did facial reconstructions and things, but nobody came forward to claim this victim as their family member or their friend or somebody they knew. Now, one of the things that they were really hoping to pin things on was her clothing, what she was wearing, because that was quite distinctive, like quite a distinctive style that you may think that somebody would recognize, or at least they would hope so. She wore a red v-neck shirt with yellow piping around the shoulder. It also had piping around the neck, waist and arms, and that was a black and blue colour. She also had a red, white and blue wraparound, like, really long skirt. It was actually known to be like a peasant style skirt at the time. And at the bottom of the skirt, it had illustrations of peacocks. So again, you know, they were hoping that from that somebody may come forward and they might get an ID on this girl. They also found a gold chain with a cross attached to the end, and that was matted into her hair. Now, I believe that a witness did actually come forward to say that they'd seen this girl in the store. This one was called Anne Latimer, and she'd seen her in a supermarket which was close back to the cemetery where her body was actually found. And she remembered it very vividly because she recalls her skirt. Like I said, they were really pinning their hopes on somebody recognising it, and they did. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen her 2 days before her body was actually found, and she was doing a bit of shopping with her daughter, and she remembers that her daughter asked about the skirts, asking if there were eagles on it, and her mum said no, they're peacocks. And I believe she actually tried to talk to this young lady at some point whilst in the store to ask her where she got this skirt from, because she really liked it, but she just kind of looked at her with like a blank expression and then just walked off and didn't actually say anything. They really hoped that this would lead somewhere, that, you know, somebody else would come forward to say that they'd seen her or literally anything, but sadly, again, nothing came from it. And when Eric Kranz actually learned of this new sort of information, this witness, he went to that supermarket and wherever it was, the store, and he went through all the bins all around the area in the hopes of finding literally anything. But he didn't, sadly. He didn't find anything. Oh, he also ran checks on the cards that were used in the store that day. Again, nothing. And this is around about the time that he decided that he was going to, he was going to actually give her the name Princess Doe. Again, he didn't want her to sort of fade from memory like sadly, a lot of Jane and John Does do. So he figured that giving her the name Princess would sort of make her more distinguished and more in people's minds. And it actually did work, because her case was shared and shared and shared again. You know, it was publicised quite a lot, which is really good. It really did affect Eric, this case. He worked on it for so long, and it was something that he really wanted to solve. He really wanted to get her ID back. He really wanted to basically catch her murderer. He was very dedicated. Then 6 months passed by, you know, they still don't have an identity for Princess Doe, and they decide that they have enough of, like, her DNA, everything that they're going to get from her, so they were finally going to lay her to rest. And normally unnamed victims could just go in sort of a plot in a potter's field. They didn't want that for Princess Doe. Local residents and the community all came together. They all had this really nice sort of funeral for her, and they put towards a headstone. And it's just really, really nice of them to do that for this poor unnamed young woman who nobody even knew who she was. It's just heartbreaking. But yeah, it was like a really nice thing for her to have this headstone instead of just being buried in a potter's field. That was on the 22nd of January in 1983. And her headstone read, Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all. Born, ? Found July 15th, 1982. They processed thousands of fingerprints, they checked missing people's cases all over the place, and they did have leads, they did have suspects, they did have people they thought it was, like, over the years, you know, obviously, but it turned out to not be any of them, or they didn't have proof that it was them. She was also the first unidentified victim to be entered into the FBI's database. Well, the National Computerized sort of Files Online, the NCIC. And like I said, they had a few people they thought it was. They thought at one point it was called Diane Dye. She went missing on the 30th of July in 1979 and was just 13 years old at the time. And visibly, she seemed like to be a reasonable match to Princess Doe. And they did exhume Princess Doe in 1999 to collect DNA samples. And then in 2003, they tried to sort of compare them to Diane Dye's family. And this is when they finally sort of proved that it was not her. So Princess Doe and Diane Dye are two completely different people. And many more people over the years have been ruled out as being Princess Doe through either DNA, dental records, things like that. You've got Amy Yamichek, Emma Vaughn, and Kathleen Kelly. They were all believed to be very, like, highly possible that they could have been Princess Doe, but again, they was all ruled out. They didn't really give up on the case, obviously, but it was just really hard to find any more information. Like I said, they looked into everything, they processed all of the evidence that they had, and it didn't lead anywhere. It led them to suspects of who it could be, and then it would turn up that it wasn't them. But then in 2012, they did this isotope testing. That was taken from her teeth, and they were hoping that they would get something from that. It showed them that she was almost certainly was born in the United States, and that she had spent 10 months living in a Midwestern state. It did, like I said, it provided that new information. It also provided that she had likely lived in Arizona at some point, and that potentially that was even where she was born. She also spent a lot of time in Long Island, and from that they also released a new composite sketch of the victim. With regards to her clothes, they looked into all of that as to see whether they could find where, like I said, it was a pretty distinctive skirt, so they looked to where these were sold, but they were actually sold all over, like, the country, USA, so they kind of didn't really get anywhere on that, because, you know, it wasn't like it was sold in one area. Not a lot of people had them, they were sold all over the place. And with these updates in the sketches, people would ring in and say that they may know her, you know, things like that, but they would follow up all of these leads, and it would prove that sadly none of them were Princess Doe. Then we come to a man called Arthur Kinlaw. Now, in 1999, I believe another lieutenant took over the case, and he was called Stephen Spears. He gets a phone call to say that the police department in New York had a Arthur Kinlaw in custody, and his wife. She was called Donna Kinlaw. Now, Arthur had actually been charged with the murder of a woman who was known as the name Linda. To this day, we still don't know who this woman's actual identity was, because Linda was like a false name. But Arthur and Donna were involved in sex workering and things like that, you know, so that name was probably a fake name, and we still literally don't know who Linda is to this day. But he was caught for her murder, and he was being questioned about that, and so was Donna. And then this is when she sort of cracks and starts to tell the police of her husband's other crimes. One of them was that he had murdered a teenage girl in a New Jersey cemetery. Does that sound familiar to anyone? So Stephen Spears travels all the way down, and he wants to speak to sort of him, you know, them himself. Donna would tell him that her husband was like a pimp, and he would often bring runaways and things like that in and try and get them into his sex working ring, which is just awful, but it's what they did. And on one particular occasion, he came home with a young girl, Princess Doe, who she was claiming And I've read two things here. Now, either he thought she was too inexperienced, she was useless, he tried to sell her off and nobody wanted her. I've read that, but I'm kind of more leaning towards that. The other one that I've read, which is that she wasn't interested and she didn't want to do it. And because of that, he wanted to get rid of her. And so he did. He went off with her and killed her. And it's thought that maybe I don't know, maybe he smashed her face in that badly so that either he thought that she was beautiful and he didn't want her to have that anymore, like it was that sort of motive, or that maybe he thought if somebody knew who she was that they would catch him. I literally don't know. Obviously, Donna didn't provide a name for Princess Doe, so it kind of led the investigators to be thinking like, either she's telling the truth and he did do this, or she's lying and trying to get like a reduced sentence and trying to get a deal out of it. And because she didn't have the name, because there was no evidence against Arthur with regards to Princess Doe, sadly it didn't lead anywhere and they couldn't do anything about it. He was charged for the murder of Linda, and Donna was charged as an accomplice. I believe he got a life sentence for that, and she got so many years. I think she got out in 2003 or something like that. But, you know, they didn't have any evidence with regards to Princess Doe. Now, the interesting thing is that in 2005, he actually wrote like a letter to claim that he did actually murder the girl known as Princess Doe. Stephen went to go and speak to him to say, you know, to figure out what was going on. He said that he murdered a girl in a New Jersey cemetery. He also said what he was saying matched up with Donna's story, but he also mentioned something she neglected to mention, that was that Donna was also there. He then decided that he was going to have to go and speak to Donna again, of course, because now they're saying conflicting things. Donna never mentioned she was there, and now he's saying that she was. And then when he spoke to her, she admitted that she actually was there too. She gave little bits of information stating that Princess Doe, was definitely from New York, probably Long Island, and all these other bits of information, and he really hoped that that would be enough to prove something, to get her identity, anything. And Donna also agreed to do, like, work with a sketch artist to sketch her face, because she must have seen it if she's claiming that she knows who she is. Well, not knows who she is, because she still didn't give a name, but she agreed to that, and they did a sketch of Princess Doe. So I've read articles that they claim that she had worked for them for like a few weeks, and therefore why didn't they have a name? It was thought to be strange, but I don't know whether that obviously ties in with the fact that he tried to sell her off and he couldn't, and she wasn't very good at it. But then if you're looking at the side where she was refusing to do it, maybe he literally just brought her in and she didn't want to do it, and then he'd not known her that long and that's why he didn't know her name. I don't know, but because of that and because of literally no evidence pointing that they had done anything to her, you know, they couldn't prove anything, and so the case against Arthur never went anywhere with regards to Princess Doe. But like I said, they never gave up on this case, and obviously over the years with these, a lot of Jane Doe and John Doe cases have been being solved with the advances in DNA and genetic genealogy. And that's exactly what happened with this case. In 2021, with the help of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Princess Doe's molar and eyelash were submitted to Australia Forensics for possible DNA extraction. And what's so important about that is that even though the samples may be really, really degraded, they can still get a lot of DNA out of it. And obviously they then upload that to the genealogy database, and then they're hoping that somewhere along the lines that they can either rebuild the family tree or something like that, that the family is in that database. The company even said that they were lucky enough to find a piece of sort of DNA that was, well, they were able to find something that was really well preserved, and they were able to get lots of DNA from that, and that is how they completed her DNA profile. And this, again, like I said, was announced literally on the 15th, well, I'm recording this on the 17th, I believe it was the 15th, 2 days ago now, of July 2022, and they uncovered that the identity of Princess Doe is Dawn Olanick. Dawn Olanick was born to parents on the 5th of August in 1964 in West Babylon, New York, in the United States. We don't really know much information on her family. Don't know her parents' names. Apparently she had a brother and a sister. Again, don't really know their names. But it's just so amazing that she has finally got her identity back. We finally know who she is. She was 17 years old at the time of her murder. She had hazel eyes, for those wanting to know, because again, her eye colour was never discovered because of the state of her face, which just is heartbreaking. But she's finally got her identity back after all these years, after 40 years. And everyone is just so ecstatic. Her family are obviously deeply saddened that they found out that this was Dawn, because they just hoped that one day she would come back, and sadly she never will. And you know, that's hard to hear. You know, you live with that hope, thinking one day they will do, and then you find out that they'd been deceased all that time. It's just heartbreaking. But the family are very thankful to the community, to the police department, all they did for Dawn, how they did the funeral, and all put the money together for a headstone, which they've gone to visit, because they really did treat her like one of their own, even though they didn't know her and she wasn't one of their own. Like, she didn't live in the town or anything like that, so they were really thankful for that. Dawn had just finished her junior year of high school before her murder. She was from Long Island, from the West Babylon and Bohemia areas, and that is where she lived her life, and sadly it ended in such a devastating way. We don't really know any more information on Dawn, as it has not yet been released, which the prosecutors have said they are not releasing it yet. So more information on Dawn may come out, hopefully it will do, so we know a bit more about who she was. But, you know, they have also from this discovered who her killer was. And guess what? It was none other than Arthur Kinlaw. Like, I don't know, sometimes in these cases you have suspects, you think it could be them. But then, and I know he admitted it, but there's a lot of people that admit things that they don't do. So you can't really put sort of a whole lot of warrant on that. They didn't have a name, they didn't have any evidence to prove that they'd done it. And it turns out that it actually was him. I found that crazy. Like, they had the right man all along, but they just didn't have the evidence to prove it, and they didn't. There were a lot of questions around it, because I guess they did kind of believe it, and they didn't kind of believe it, because there was just nothing. But yeah, it was him. He actually did it. So now not only has her identity finally been found, her murderer has finally been found. He is 68 years old now. I believe he was still in jail for the murder of Linda anyway, but now he finds himself charged with the first-degree murder of Dawn Olanick, Princess Doe. And again, he probably would get life if convicted, which I don't know why he wouldn't get convicted of it, to be honest. He literally admitted to it, and now they must have some evidence. I don't know, finding out her identity. They found out that he was a killer from that. So I don't know the ins and outs of it. I just know what has been released in the public, and I really wanted to let you guys know, because I found this so amazing that after 40 years she's finally been given a name. Her family, who have been wondering for all that time where she was, finally know. I know it's heartbreaking that she's deceased, but they finally know what happened to her, and she can finally get the justice that she deserves after all this time. It's amazing. Nobody ever gave up on this case, and it just goes to show that sometimes in cases like that, when you just don't give up, that you eventually find out who did it. I'm not saying that that's always the case, because obviously it isn't, but I just find it so amazing that her case was finally solved. So yeah, that is the end of this case. If you've enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of Princess Doe, Dawn Olanick, and until next time, bye!